Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday, April 26th. It is 9:15 a.m. here in San Diego, California. And today on In the Fight with Bo Templin, we will have on my very first guest of the show. Back in December, we had an incredible conversation. He is one of my favorite minds in combat sports. Honestly, one of my favorite minds in just entertainment today. Robin, I have learned so much from you over the years. Today on In the Fight with Bo Templin, the one, the only, Mr. Robin Black.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, and I love hanging out with you, man. You are very thoughtful. You're always trying to look at things in a different way, which I appreciate. It's very easy for us to kind of get stuck in the same linear thinking when it comes to fighting or any kind of art. And so, yeah, we have fun hanging, man.
Well, something that you've really kind of instilled into me is that fighting is changing every single day. So if we look at it the same way we did yesterday, we are going to be sorely mistaken for what will happen tomorrow. And you've opened my eyes to that a lot.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment. And that's the kind of thing I'm hoping to do, over time. Like I realized that my gig is to enrich the experience of consuming this kind of art. I realized that over time, because every now and again, whatever you do should check in and go, what is it I do? Do I just follow the formula that I've always been doing? Because if so, I'm not going to do something meaningful. Because as you said, not just fighting changes, the world changes constantly. Everyone, how we think, what we say, what is cool and uncool and relevant and irrelevant, acceptable and unacceptable. We are changing. The world is changing. The context is changing. Everything is changing. And I think it's really, really important that we look at it doesn't matter how we look at our entertainment, sports, art. It doesn't matter that much, but it matters how we look at the world. And we practice how to think when we consume shit that we like, when we play video games or watch fighting or whatever we do.
So this is a great way to start because when you were on my show in December, you said something that I believe not many people believed in as well. You said something that stood out to me in that we were talking about Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier.
Mm-hmm.
And, immediately I said, well, it is a rematch and they're vastly different fighters, right? They changed.
Mm-hmm.
And we went on to a really nice tangent there talking about how different the two fighters were. And something you said was, if you want to look at the second fight, don't look at the first fight. And that really stood out to me. And obviously it proved to be like somewhat true. Like there's a lot to their rematch, but there is some truth to what you said about their first fight was not their second fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this would be a fun place to start, is that I know it's looking ahead to months away, but I am curious what your advice would be to people trying to look into the third fight between Poirier and McGregor now that we've seen it happen twice.
Okay. So this brings up an interesting thing. I don't know if we talked about this, but I've talked about it a lot over the last couple of months because this is in line with my way of consuming fighting, as the most important aspect of it is that it is ever changing, right? So looking at what is pretty irrelevant because that's kind of what was. That's my point. People will say, well, I can only go with what is, and what is this last fight. It's like, no, that's what was. They were those people in that context doing it that way. This is a bit of a tangent, but that's what I do. But I think I said to you, I've certainly said it a lot. It's certainly been big in my line of thinking, and it is even more so now. At one point, we would throw a Superman punch. We'd be like, isn't that great? I can throw a Superman punch. I'll fake the kick. He'll bite on the kick, and then I'll punch him. Over time, people saw that whole thing, and it became obvious. It's like I can trick, you with a card trick you don't know, but I can't trick Penn and Teller because they know the fucking trick, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, I would much rather have somebody try to throw a Superman punch at me than be forced to have to throw one, because that's better. And the same thing is happening with leg kicks. I've been saying it for a long time. People may notice it after the weekend. They may not. But the reason everybody's spamming each other with leg kicks, and it worked great for Dustin Poirier against Conor McGregor, is because we think there are no consequences. We think it's free. It's fucking free. Because what happens is a offense becomes somewhat popular again. It's not new. Kicking somebody low in the leg is not new. It's ancient, but it becomes popular again. And then people get very good at the offense immediately. Meanwhile, for the last 3 years, people have been getting very good at the defense. They think that Chris Weidman's leg breaking in half is random. It's not random. It is what you do when everybody is leg kicking you. You create ways to discourage them from leg kicking you by checking them, by hurting them. You don't assume you're going to break their leg in half, but the intention is to hurt them. Whether that is so specifically the case in this case or not, you turn the shin out. You also land the counter. So what Conor is currently doing is not just going, how do I deal with the calf kicks? Is how do I fuck this guy up if he throws a calf kick, right? Dustin is smart. So Dustin is right there going, if I was Conor, I would be training, rehearsing, preparing how to hurt Dustin when he leg kicks me. Not just how to not get leg kicked, how to use that as an opportunity to hurt him. I hate the word opportunity. Something about it I just don't like. I don't know why. But the chance, the turn to hurt him. And so I'm Dustin, and I have to anticipate and prepare for that change. I could prepare for it by faking the leg kick, making him think I'm going to do it, drawing out whatever his counter is, whatever. But so immediately, the reason we cannot use that last fight as a blueprint for this fight is because those two humans and the 6 or 8 key humans around them that are brilliant are all using that fight as ways to retool, reapproach, re-strategize, re-prepare for each other, and they're both doing it. And they're both doing it to what they think the other will be doing. So for any of us to sit here and think that because we watched, 110 UFC shows and we heard commentary, which is not based on education, it's based on entertainment and hype and many other perfectly good reasons. It's not intended to teach us things. But we're on Twitter. We're like, well, the key to Conor McGregor is you got to kick the calf. Well, that's great because you know what Conor is? He's just a video game character who gets kicked in the calf and never changes. That's just not real. It's just not the real world, right? The real world isn't take a snapshot, assume that these guys are have permanent attributes. They are that. And now we, the observer, can figure out how to beat them. It's all nonsense. It's all of it exists entirely for entertainment purposes, to make people buy pay-per-views, to sell t-shirts, to do all of these things. None of it is real. What is real is what I'm telling you now. And I'm not the only one who knows it. I just have spent enough time looking at it and being like, wait a second, why do we talk in nonsensical ways? What could we do different? What's really going on? What happens when I speak to Mike Brown about this for an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours, chilled with no camera on? What real information do we gain? Then I have that information, and I just cannot, in good conscience, look at a camera and pretend that's not true. So I just have to go down this path of trying to be truthful.
With this whole calf kick conversation, it's something that I had brought up to you because we went through the trends of MMA, right? We kind of went through the phases of it. And of course, the moment we talked about it on the podcast, it's exploded in popularity and conversation. And obviously that's the McGregor effect. Anytime he's in a fight, whatever he does, it's labeled as the new wave or whatever it may be.
Yeah. In this case, what was done to him, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. In the fight, when Poirier fought McGregor the second time, I think something noticeable, at least to the naked, untrained eye, was that Conor was trying to not necessarily catch the calf kick or leg kick, but he was trying to return immediately with a left straight down the middle. The question I kind of had was, when you throw a calf kick, you are presumably on one foot, correct? You are left on one foot. That means two things. You are immobile when you throw one because you were only on one foot.
Or you're less mobile or different mobile.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And then the second thing, and this is speculation, so I'm more asking you, is in boxing, they say don't bounce around too much because then if you get hit while you're not grounded and stable, you're going to eat the shot worse than if you are grounded with two legs firmly planted. My question is if Dustin hypothetically continues to throw that kick again. Conor, I assume, is going to try to exploit one of those two things by nature, but I was curious, what didn't he do in that second fight to properly counter the calf kick? So outside of checking it, because that's what everyone said, but I assume that Conor wants to do more than just check the kick. I assume he's going to want to come back and make Dustin pay for it, and we saw that happen. He seemed to be a half second off. I was curious what your analysis was when it came to like that returning left hand off of the calf kick.
So I spoke to people like Conor, people very close to them about it, and a lot of the narrative, and they even said it. Conor even kind of fell into the narrative, but that's not because he's lying or trying to misdirect anybody. It's because narratives are powerful. So the narrative to people who don't, literally don't fight, they don't fight or train or whatever, people would be like, he had a boxing heavy approach because he fought Mayweather and was preparing for, therefore this changed as a result, the kick. It's like they even perpetuated that. And it's easy because what we do in television and in media is we try to take complexity and simplify it. But when you simplify really complex things, and you do it more and more over time, essentially you start completely, lying is the wrong word because it's not an intent, but you're just not telling the truth anymore. None of that was true. Conor didn't do rounds boxing, wearing boxing gloves and baggy pants when he prepared for Dustin Poirier. He did the same thing that all martial artists are doing, which is big glove sparring, hitting with kicking and takedowns, but not a lot of work on the ground, and small glove sparring, lighter hitting, but lots of work on the ground. Those two things in combination are what rounds he did. And when you spoke to him and the people around them, they were like, we get calf kicked all the time. Every gym, it feels new to people who don't study something. But Michael Chandler was calf kicked by Brett Primus in like 2017 and lost his title. And in fact, it wasn't a calf kick. It was directly at the insertion behind the knee, which is exactly where Anthony Smith smashed somebody. And it's same thing. It's like our deep misunderstanding happens because the nature of television is such that and think of what it is. So Joe Rogan's the best. Take anyone else who does it. Think of what we do. We have seconds to try to make sense of something to somebody who is educated only through watching sports. So we have to say extreme generalities, but that's not the truth of the matter. That's what, when we watch sports, we watch football our entire life. So I'll pump fake to this. We think we know football. We don't have a fucking clue about football. We know only the language of sport, which is not reality. So as we're discussing this, people are like, well, it's a calf kick, blah, blah, blah. That fucking nerve wraps all the way around the bone. You can access it through the insertion of the hamstring at the back of the knee. You can access it actually at the insertion of one of the quadricep heads of the knee. You can access it by striking the meat of the calf. Like that nerve, that deadening of the leg is accessible through all of that. So anyways, Conor got hit a lot in training like everyone else on earth. If Just Bleed 420 on Twitter is like, calf kicks, they work. What logical person doesn't think that Conor McGregor and Kavanaugh and all of his coaches are, of course, have been obsessed with that. Kavanaugh was present when Michael Chandler lost his title that day. He was in Chicago. I was in Chicago. Actually, was that Chicago? Don't think so. I think he fought a Pitbull, wherever it was, California, wherever it was. He was president. Of course, they're thinking of that. Conor got kicked there like every other fighter. Since 2017, every pro fighter in every gym on planet Earth has been spamming each other with calf kicks. But they wear pads. They were pads. They both have pads. And they smash each other and they think, fuck that guy. That doesn't hurt. I'm going to go and I'm going to punch him. But then you remove the pads and you train a bit. You still aren't doing it with the full psychological and emotional arousal of a fight. Now you are. Now Poirier hits him twice and his leg is dead. And now he's still thinking, he's still dealing, he's still trying to process it. Now he's trying to grab it. That was probably never the intention, although he is good at catching kicks and striking. So the whole thing just changed, right? The whole dynamic of everything changed because now he got a dead leg. That wasn't something we planned for and something he'd never experienced because in training, it just never happened. right? So all of that became new information for him to deal with. But the reality of it, and you're asking about countering it, there's 1,000 ways to counter it. I think Jan Blachowicz knocked out Corey Anderson, I believe, someone 2-3 years ago, throwing a right hand during a calf kick. You throw a right calf kick at me, I read it, and I react early on it, and I knock you unconscious with a right hand. You're going to see shitloads of that in the coming months. People may not identify it. They might not spot that only a month earlier, that would have been a calf kick where my leg is injured. Now it's an unconscious man for throwing the calf kick, but the game is changing rapidly. Chris Weidman will not be the only person with a broken leg, because now we all have believed that these calf kicks are consequence-free. We're at distance, nothing's happening. I can kick you in the calf, maybe your leg will deaden, now you'll start to attack me. We think it's a freebie. There's no freebies in fighting. You're either going to get knocked unconscious. So, and another aspect is, in one way, every single kick that anyone throws is different. In another way, they're all just fucking kicks. Do you know what I mean? These are the beautiful things about trying to truly understand an art form, is that you have to keep both of those two truths in your mind at the same time. You know, it's a calf kick, it's a thigh kick, it's a kick to the back of the knee, it's a kick to the body, but it's just a fucking kick. It doesn't matter. And strategically speaking, Conor fought a rematch with Nate Diaz, and one of the primary differences he used to win the second fight was adding leg kicks to his strategy. And then Dustin did it to him. He should have known that. He experienced it on the other side. Calf, thigh, back of the knee, doesn't matter. Strategically, but Dustin did to beat Conor the second time what Conor did to beat Nate the second time.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it was one of the things I immediately brought up. I found it almost hard to believe that Conor wasn't aware of it. Of course he was aware.
Of course
He's been training every day for the last 10 years of his life in an MMA gym. Yeah. If that's the case, you're aware of calf kick.
And if a kid watching UFC on Twitter is like, blah, 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 calf kicks, what, Conor doesn't? Everybody's been doing them and having them done to him. He knew about it. He just wasn't prepared for the biological consequences that sometimes happen. And they've become not sometimes, like rarely on rare occasions, they've become quite common because people are really committing to them. But because they're really committing to them, people are going to get their fucking leg broken. And that's what happened to Chris.
So, and this is, I think, actually a good place to kind of spin this conversation a little bit. Nami Yunus versus Wei Li over the weekend on Saturday. And we don't need to like break down the entire fight or anything, but something we saw was that Wei Li moved her hips back, at least again to the naked eye. Robin, I assume you will correct me if I'm ever wrong about anything here. From the naked eye, Wei Li backed up and moved her hips in preparation for what appeared to be like an inside leg kick. Then Nami Yunus landed the high head kick. Yeah. Am I wrong there, or are we going to see more of that as well?
It looked like it. Yes, we'll definitely see more of that, because if you're worried about me doing something to you and you react to that, I'll do something else. You're busy. And think of it in many ways, not just what you do with your body, but you're deploying your mental resources. You're deploying your mental resources here. So what's up? What's not? Where are they not? Here.
Yeah.
Right? Your focus is a very, very detailed thing. Just studying focus, I've tried to study how the brain uses the different types of focus, inward focus, outward focus, executive focus. You're using your focus, how to consume the information around you. You're using that in different ways, you know? And so she's now using that, but there's another element to it that's super cool to that kick. And if you go back and watch, I'll show you. It's basically when typically, if I'm going to come towards you, let's say I'm going to throw a kick, but I'm going to do anything or move away from you. When you see this leg move, what you'll normally see is this, and what your brain thinks happens is this. So watch my front leg. I move away, right? So you see my leg move, and in your mind, you think I've moved away. And you'll notice among the things Rose does in that sequence is there's something is happening. There may be little feints, but the biggest thing, at least to me, the biggest lie she tells is this leg moves back. But instead of it moving back where my whole body moves back, This leg alone moves back, and this leg stays put. What does that mean? That means I'm actually closer to you than you think, right? I've lied. I've tricked your brain into thinking I did this, when in fact all I did was this. So your eyes distance from the closest part of my body is this foot. I've now lied and I've taken this foot and I've brought it further away from you. So in that split second, your brain thinks I moved further away from you. It's a really old karate trick. Like, we jump back or we pretend to jump back and we step forward. It's a tiny thing, but in the sequence of things that she does, you'll notice that. And she brings it back to here and then slips in with both. So what it is, instead of slipping all the way out and all the way back to the same place, she stays in the same place, lies about moving away, and becomes closer. Do you pick up?
That's incredible. It makes so much sense.
And it is a lie to your brain. And that's the fucking game. None of this shit is happening in words. Because the amount of time it takes me to say words like, lie about this, then step here, then pretend to kick the inside, and then do that. If we're fighting, and my brain is trying to go, Bo's using a fake right now, then he's going to lean into here. Now, this is happening faster than words. So it's right. So we can't think in words. So there's two different primary systems at which you process things. One is, Bo, what is 2 + 2?
4.
What is 247 times 14?
Ooh.
But you could do it. How would you do it? It would that would not just take longer, it would be a different type of thinking. We have to train so that Bo, what is 412 times 11, becomes processed like Bo, what is 2 + 2? So it happens by itself. How can something happen by itself when we're having a dynamic physical debate? We have to train it. And that's what these guys are doing. They're trained to the point that the brain is making these choices and they literally watch themselves make it. So you start telling these lies to the brain and it believes what is happening to be one thing and it's something different. So Wei Li's brain thought in that moment, not consciously, she used no words to think this, but the brain algorithmically believed Rose was further away than she was because of that one old karate lie. Now she actually was closer. And in that moment, she slid in and she's kicked her in the face. And then in that time, the brain's now trying to process it if it thinks it's also getting kicked in the leg. Also, imagine, too, that it's not just like, there's nothing about that kick that looked like the leg except for the distance. From here, I might kick you in the face. From here, I can't reach your face. I can reach your inside leg. So the reason Rose acted and did that was because there was a lie in distance. Here, you believe is the closest I can reach there, when in fact I could kick you in the face. So it's just, and this is everything about fighting. How we speak about it. He saw this and he did that. Oh my God, big right hand. Now that's all just television. It's not real. So it's very difficult for us if we are attached to these belief systems of what we think is really happening. We can have these conversations about fighting, but they're not very factual because we're talking about people processing a fight in words, which they are not doing. We're using words to describe something that is done without independent of words.
So when you see a magic trick like the karate distance maneuver that you're talking about, the sleight of hand almost.
Yeah.
How much, like when you see that happen, I'm at home and I say, wow, Trevor Whitman saw something. He's brilliant. How much, I don't want to say credit are you giving to Trevor Whitman, but like, how much do you attribute almost to him saying like, we might be able to pull something off like that? Do you know, is that something like Trevor Whitman's students do? Or is that more of a Nami Yunus habit that molded well with Whitman? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I don't know Trevor Whitman that well. I've spoken to him a couple of times. I know Dwayne Ludwig better, and Dwayne's obsessed with Trevor's thinking. A lot of people are. But if I talk to other people of this caliber of coaching, I assume Trevor would agree. what he may say on TV or in Instagram or whatever for the purposes of not of having conversation that people understand in the current modern, the language of the time would be different than what he might say in a room full of martial artists. In a room full of martial artists, I suspect he would say, I honestly don't fucking deserve very much credit. Right? That's what they mostly say and they mostly believe. Again, it's something we do because we don't know what the fuck to talk about because we haven't mostly developed the language or the habit of trying to speak about these things in truth. We believe the audience, and I don't believe this. This is why we're having this conversation. But the people who make television honestly believe the audience is stupid. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that to be mean, but I have had lots of conversations with executives who've literally been like, blah, 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 casual audience, yada, yada. The truth is, when you have these conversations and people who don't watch fighting hear this conversation, they'll find it infinitely more interesting than big right hand, oh my God, dished out lots of ground and pound, it's over. My God, is this guy the greatest ever? The winner gets the title shot, striker versus grappler and a stylist. That's a language. That's a language that was created that is believed to be the modern language of fighting. And it's in fact incredibly commodified, almost useless in reality, and really misleading. So we talk blah, 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 Trevor Whitman, yada, 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 Faraz Zahabi, Duke, Rufus. All of these people are brilliant. And everyone I mentioned there are people I admire and I've learned a tremendous amount from. When I go into their gyms, I just marvel at how brilliant they are. They will tell you they didn't fight that fight. They will tell you that all they could do is do their best to, and if it happens that some week it's alpha male and then next week it's ATT and then right now it's Trevor Whitman, all of these people will tell you, I just get fighters ready. I'll prepare them in many ways. Rose has probably been playing that thing since she was young. And here's the other thing. A lot of this stuff isn't necessarily even strategized to provide the exact outcome or result. A lot of the time, the thing I do just tricks your brain because your brain is making, if you're anticipating too much, you start to write how it's supposed to go, and that's when you get surprised. And Jorge, got punched. Usman literally threw a fake jab to a hook that became a fake hook to a pull to a punch. Fucking that combination, you learn it in the first 6 months of being a boxer. There's 100,000. There's 800,000 people on Earth who can throw that combination. That combination didn't win the fight. Whoever taught, whether it was Henry Hooft, who taught him that combination, or Trevor, who taught him that combination, it's irrelevant. I fucking know that combination. So do you. So does everybody watching this that has ever trained boxing. Combination didn't do shit. Combinations don't knock people out. Humans do. Humans. And, it's the same like, guitars don't play music. People play the guitar. They're tools. These are tools. These are not, the human expresses it. And 100,000 people could throw that on pads, and Usman could throw that 600 times. But in that moment, he did it. It wasn't what. So, and maybe that's the best way to do it. What is fake pump jab, a fake hook to a pull to a right hand? What? It's not what. When? Why? How? Those are what did it. He did it at the right time. He did it when Jorge's mind thought something else was happening. He did it right after he'd already set up a particular series of things that he may not have been like, I'm going to throw a bunch of one twos and then a one pull two. It's just what he did. And it's in a lot of times in those moments, it happens. So what Trevor or Henry or anyone else would do would make him in the best shape he could be in, armed with the best tools that he could have, and most important, free to express them, and with when that punch had so much belief in it. That's more important than the what. The belief that was in that, and you see it in his fucking face, you see it in how deep he did it. That punch had so much self-belief in it. And if you asked him, he might say, Trevor gave me that self-belief. He might say, Henry gave me that self-belief. He might say, sparring gave me that. It doesn't matter. It's all of it. It's all of it. So, the great coaches are a huge part of it. The reason to even have this conversation with these fighters at this level, to be capable of that, all of these coaches are brilliant. In 5 months, if a bunch of fighters happen to be Henry Hooft people, or a bunch of them happen to be Matt Hume people, or a bunch of them happen to be Faraz right now, or, alpha male, none of them are better than the other. But in certain moments of their life, they're just nailing it as a coach. They just have just the right fighter. They have just the right athlete. They build just the right relationship. That's a big one too. Big one. What type of relationship does Rose need with a coach? A father, a best friend, a taskmaster, somebody who, for me, my favorite coach ever was Billy Martin, who was a boxing coach. And there was something about him and me where I desperately wanted to please him. Just desperately wanted to please this man. I don't know what it was about his personality or him. I just wanted him to make him proud. And so sometimes it's really just that. And sometimes you see fighters leave the sort of, third and second tier coach as far as experience and being proven, where they were successful. And it was really the relationship. And they go to a super gym and they become the same or not quite as good. And the coaches these are the best coaches in the world right now. And from month to month or half a year to half a year, some will be hot. Some will be just really getting their shit together. But it's true of a lawyer and a doctor and a Uber driver and everything. There are times where we have it, like we're getting the right sleep, we're doing the right food, we're exercising just right, we're on top of our games. And Trevor's one of those guys right now, and he's brilliant.
So one thing that, you've emphasized for years is, one, like the narrative, and two is reaction. Like, people's immediate reaction to things are fascinating at times because they're oversimplified. But the narrative does not guarantee the truth, but it also does not guarantee a lie either. A lot of times the narrative can also be the truth as well. So
yes,
I find that interesting. And with the Usman fight, I had one question for you, and you brought up the fight. So early in the fight, and I don't know if this is what I saw or this was my perception of what I saw, he at times, on 2 or 3 or 4 different occasions, he kind of threw like a loopier left hook. Like he would, I don't know if he was shooting or attempting a shoot, and then would throw a looping left hand. And immediately I was like, well, I find that interesting for Usman. He's generally speaking, he's very like basic with his striking, not bad basic, just that's
fundamental.
his style. He stays very straight. He throws 1s and 2s, but he was throwing that big looping left hook, and I found that interesting. Was that left hook, in your opinion, to set up something later, or do you think the left hook was the shot that he was trying to land early on? Do you know what punch I'm talking about?
Yeah, the wide. So sometimes it could be like when you're changing a fighter, sometimes you have a particular intention, and then a different thing happens, and it's great. And it was the change that happened. That hook could have been there because they really believed that something in the nature of how Jorge moved or moved last time or might move this time would work with that. I'll give you an example of one where it's specific. So Frankie Edgar knocked out Chad Mendes, and I talked to Mark Henry about it very specifically. Mark is brilliant and is a good friend, and I was like, Frankie went super wide, and he said, and I did a breakdown of it. Got removed because you can't break down UFC shit. They don't stand for that, which is crazy, right? Like
we haven't been binked yet, so we're keeping it hush hush. But we have not been binked yet.
Wow, really? And you've used footage? Yeah.
I cannot confirm nor deny.
Yeah,
but
that's good. I mean, but it's a crazy thing, right? We're
It's
all
terrible.
the type of people who will, in a modern, you fucking work for 1:37 p.m. Like, you're a modern digital company. The right modern way to do it is to empower all of your audience to share things passionately, not penalize them and turn them into enemies, right? But anyways,
it's also not even entertainment purposes. Like what you do.
What I do is education.
It's education. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to forward push that. And I'm sorry, we're getting off on a tangent here, but it's probably my least favorite thing about the UFC.
Yeah.
Like, it's my biggest complaint is that people can't analyze, like, how are we going to teach new fans? How are we going to bring in new fans?
But this is what I'm talking about too. Like, if you only watch the UFC, I'm not trying to be rude, but if you take someone who only watches the UFC and you take somebody who consumes a lot of different martial arts, combat sports, different types of stuff, the UFC audience is not only less educated, but actually misunderstands things almost in a fake news kind of way. They believe certain things that are untrue to be deeply true because of this very thing. The WWE was the same model. You have to use particular language. You call them superstars, not wrestlers. It's the same kind of thing. There's certain language that is just so ingrained in that broadcast that it's actually teaching audience, or not fighters, to believe they know something that is many things that are entirely untrue about the thing they're watching. But that's hey, it's not our business, right? When you said that's the thing you like the least about them, the things I love the most about getting to cover the UFC, I covered on SportsCenter in Canada, is the fighting. I love the fighting. I love the fighters, and I actually really like Dana. I like how driven he is, and now he's not perfect like nobody, but I really like him. And my creative work with him has been cool. But what I don't like is it's fucking corporate. Like, it's so corporate. Somehow you when you're like super corporate, you have corporate policies and corporate execs who like couldn't give two fucks about martial arts. Yet you also want to present yourself as if you're the edgy, new, current, like, rebellious, disruptive thing. That's just not true. You can't do that. Something is untrue there. You get to have Dana, who's really Dana, and then you get to have this corporate thing that's, it just doesn't make sense. But anyways, we are digressing. That wide hook. So Usman throwing that wide hook could have been for many reasons. That's the other thing. This thing led to that thing. And we'll be like, well, Trevor Whitman or Henry Hooft or Usman planned this to set up that, which created this. I'm now even more careful to say, if really there's evidence that says this actually helped lead to this, we don't have to claim that he planned that, because he may not have. Literally, he could be throwing wide hooks because, one, it's something in the belief of how they believed he would be moving, maybe based on past performance, but maybe based on something that they thought it would work. Or two, something about it would help him get him to the fence. Something about it would help him enter to the thigh. Something he did before that he had success. But it may have inadvertently or just, coincidentally also helped with the thing, which is the other thing. When these guys can perform to such a degree like Usman is, just saying, oh my God, he beat this guy, and oh man, now he beat this guy, look, he's the greatest ever. That is a good narrative. That helps us sell a pay-per-view. It does the things we want it to do if we are the corporation. But the truth is, being able to find a way and perform is something very difficult to understand. We can't just result. It's called resulting. Usman knocked out Jorge, therefore he's better, he's the best. That was a single punch. If he just didn't throw that punch, or Jorge moved in a different direction, or Jorge happened to be wrestling, or he, hesitated, his toe got caught on, I think that punch doesn't land, we have no idea how the spider web of the rest of the fight goes. It's a single punch.
I had Anthony Pettis on the show last week, and I just love the Pettis brothers.
Me too.
Love what they do. I mean, just talk about art exemplified. And unfortunately, Anthony had a loss on Friday. It was unfortunate, and I was pulling for him. And he really, in round 3, he brought it. He landed a left high kick.
Flying knee
to follow right after. And I'm excited for him to return. And then obviously Juan Archuleta versus Sergio is coming up here in 2 weeks, right?
2 weeks. Less.
May 8th or
7th.
May 7th. Cool. Yeah. 7th. Because I'm just out of my mind excited for that fight as well. Where were we? I asked
single moment.
Yes. I asked Anthony, does the best man always win in fighting? And he said no.
Absolutely not.
absolutely, he was like, there are so many factors: who you're training with, who you're coaching with, your weight cut, your health, your mental health at the time. He is so certain that that is not the case. And I just found that answer to be so interesting, because that's exactly what we're talking about right now.
The best man does not always win. But let's just say, in the context of 12 fights, you're George St. Pierre, you're Usman, you're Matt Hughes. I don't know why I picked all welterweights. You're Jose Aldo back in the day. You're Fedor. Let's say you had 15 fights. Maybe you were the best man 11, 12, 13 of those. And on those nights, you did it. And the other ones, you weren't. You just got the moment. Just found the moment. You created one moment. You were losing. There were lots of Fedor fights where he was getting killed and then created a moment. He wasn't the best man on that night, but he was the best man in that moment. And sometimes that's all you need. And there's something about these guys. That's what Usman did. A lot of times, too, we'll look back and this guy destroyed this guy. I think round one was even. And I didn't see the judges, but I bet some judges gave it to Jorge. Jorge was on his back doing damage. And round two. So Usman wasn't necessarily the best man, although he won. But he certainly was the best man in that moment. And there's something about these guys that do win. And same with Khabib. Khabib wasn't the best man against Al Iaquinta that night necessarily. He fucking won though. And he found how to win, because in the moments where you're equal to the other guy tonight, you got to get more out of you. And that's another skill. That's what makes them so great. We do a disservice when we just say, oh, they're the GOAT. This guy destroys everybody. Nobody can touch him. It's not true. And it's not doing them any service. The real service is, a lot of the times this guy's dominant. Then sometimes he's injured or something weird happens and he finds a way. And then other times he can be not winning and still creates a moment to win. That's more impressive. That wide range of what it will take you to win these fights is so much more inspiring. This is how you can learn about life and accomplishment, by studying it in this way.
By calling Fedor the GOAT, by calling Usman the greatest welterweight of all time, I actually think there's a scenario where you might be discrediting them for what they do.
Yeah.
Because what's the coolest thing about MMA or combat sports in general is that if we knew who would win, why would we watch? Right?
Yeah, for sure.
If we knew
100%.
for certain who would win, why would we watch? If we knew for certain that Fedor was the GOAT, well, then why would we watch any more of his fights? There's no danger present. But that's not true. And when Usman fights Masvidal, you can say that Usman is the greatest welterweight of all time. Yeah. But to say that doesn't mean that Masvidal doesn't present a threat, you're taking away from Usman in that moment. And I think that's really unfair.
Big time.
Every time you step into a ring, into a cage, you are facing a very, very present threat. And that's what makes careers so amazing.
100%. 100%. But this is all part of this narrative flaw and our language flaw. And the very thing we started talking about, the speaking of something that is ever changing in permanent terms. We've done a great disservice to all of these people. Once everybody had a belt, once we got photos and everybody's wearing a belt and there's interim titles and it's champion versus champion, that ceases to have meaning to people who don't know what something is. This desire to appeal to a broad audience created a broader audience with a much shallower connection. Now they could have a deep connection to a brand, three letters. They could have a deep connection to a story. They could have a deep connection to a television program, but they don't have a deep connection to the fighting. And if they did, you wouldn't need to put a belt on everybody. But once you put a belt on everybody, now, only double champion gets us fucking going. But now once Conor was the double champion, and Cormier and Amanda and Cejudo and Patricio Pitbull, and once we have that, now only greatest of all time will get us fucking going. So every conversation, literally, is this guy the greatest of all time? And it's not the fault of the person asking. It's the fault of us who disrespected that person and treated them like they were stupid and created a narrative. I mean, it's just so, it's sad. These are the greatest artists in the world putting themselves at great personal risk, and we're misrepresenting what they do by thinking that superlatives and hype will benefit them and the audience, and over time it doesn't.
So it's essentially it's just inflation, but instead of like, they talk about this in like crime, it's like, oh, if you arm the police with high level weapons, then the criminals have to get higher weapons. Essentially, that's what we're doing now. It was like, oh, if you're a champion, it's great. Now you're a double champ. It's not, it's not enough because now you're competing for the GOAT at all times. It's inflation with words. Robin, I have had you for 45 minutes, but just really, really quickly, Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira, because I know you've covered Michael Chandler's career for so long. I have to ask you about the fight. And then I wanted to go over and then Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards, because talking about the general audience, people are just going to be tuning in. I did want to talk though about Michael Chandler, just because you've covered him for so long over at Bellator. You have a great relationship with him. What should I look for in that fight that won't be discussed in the narrative?
So if you get to talk to Michael Chandler, and by all means, I will help try to connect you with him, I would ask you to ask him how, and he's been asked this, I'm sure, but how would you beat Michael Chandler? Because that's the key here. Like, Mike, you're not going to take Michael Chandler down, and you're going to have a hard time fighting with him in any range. You're not going to out-muscle Michael Chandler. You're not going to be able to out-wrestle him on the cage. So if you're fighting Michael Chandler, the route has got to be get to holding his body and then start to wind onto the back leg and climb up him. It has to be. There's no other logical approach other than a body lock. You can't try to grab his legs. You can't try to take him down against the fence. You're not going to. Shevchenko took down her opponent with body locks over and over and over again. You may not take Michael down with it, but you might get to the body lock. And if you get to the body lock, if you're Charles Oliveira, you are working on it's something he's great at already, but it's something you're obsessively programming into your brain. I'm going to get to the body lock and I'm going to climb this man, or I'm going to tangle up in him and trip him. There are many tricks you can use. So that's what you have to do if you're Charles Oliveira. Michael Chandler, I've talked about him. I've broken down most of his stuff. I'm going to do another one for Wave TV in the next week. He's the ultimate attribute-based fighter, where the blend of what he is and what he does are fucking perfect. And Henry will get a lot of credit for it, and he should, but many coaches, great coaches, could also do it, but also their relationship, I see it, their relationship is powerful. He's built around his attributes, and where his attributes end and his techniques and strategies begin are blurred. They're all the same thing. That's why he's so fucking hard to fight. That's why he's so hard to fight. He has the ability to spring in, accelerate, sprint, whatever word you want to use, from nowhere to you, and the techniques to perfectly harness and harvest that are built right into him. That's why he knocked out Dan Hooker.
Michael Chandler as a puzzle piece, and I'm using a little bit of a TV term there when I say that, but Michael Chandler as a puzzle piece, he is so difficult to solve, as you kind of said. Where do you fight him at? It can cause desperation, right? So eventually you're stuck with 5 options, and you don't like any of those options. Right. You're eventually left with, all right, well, what's best case scenario amongst those 5? That's where I want to see what Oliveira essentially decides on doing.
So let's look at it this way. Hooker looked at it and said, I think being chill, not overly lit, don't over, and maybe that wasn't even the plan, but that's how he expressed himself that night. Be mellow, be calm, see what he's got. That's not the plan against Michael Chandler. We saw that with Dan, but we've seen it with many others too. You often think, what I'll do is I'll just take in all the information. The problem with that is the information comes so quickly, and then you're unconscious. And it was the same thing when Tyron Woodley knocked out Robbie Lawler. You can
Oh,
gather all the information you like, but what you haven't done is you haven't trained as a fastball hitter is trained to hit 106-mile-an-hour fastball, not 120-mile-an-hour fastball, and you're not going to hit it. It hits you, and you're unconscious, right? It's more than you're able to read, so don't do that. So what do you do? And the answer, and this seems counterintuitive, but a lot of times the answer is counterintuitive. Possibly a better answer is go to Michael. Go to him.
mm-hmm.
But here, Michael and Henry are like, so what would we do if we were fighting us? Oh, I'd go to me. Okay, great. You'll see this. You've seen it. Mike's done it a number of times. I've seen it when he trains a lot in rooms where him and Henry are training, and then I trained with Henry. Michael hits really fucking good backing up. So he's going to do that. Right?
Oh,
Really, because they know that's what would work.
interesting.
What would they do to fight Mike? They'd go to Mike. So Mike goes back, keeps the space, stomp on the back foot as you fire the uppercut, the hook. So now you have to deal with that. You have a strategy that seems better than moving away or being chill or using circular and lateral movement at distance. Go to Mike. Well, he knows that. He's like, that's what I would do if I was fighting me. So he's prepared for that too. So it's really fucking hard.
Interesting.
But so you have to get a body lock and you have to try to climb him or tangle him and push a leg out and use the trickery of jiu-jitsu in place of the explosive, tactics of wrestling.
Okay.
As a tool to either get him down or climb up him. Or both.
Okay. Because you've seen his career for so long, those like little intricacies. That's why I had to ask you about that question. All right, last one, and it can be 30 seconds long. It can be 10 seconds long.
Yeah.
Is Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards. The casual fan, me, I represent the casual viewer at home. Yeah. Nate Diaz is my favorite fighter of all time. Yeah. He's the one I fell in love with when I first started watching it 10 years old. Yeah, I'm literally a nerd for Nate Diaz, but historically speaking, he has suffered losses against incredibly strong wrestlers.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, with a Leon Edwards in front of him, do you think Nate would take a different approach, or do you think he will once again kind of fall back to being comfortable on his back? He's always been very welcoming to say, hey, come on down into my world. I would be curious, your thoughts on that as a matchup, because historically speaking, there is evidence saying that Nate struggles-ish. Yeah. I'm not coming at Nate.
And if he knows that, he's obviously been prepping to make you. There are ways to defeat people who do that. But so I personally, for people like Nate, Nick, Tony Ferguson, I love the idea of using the guard the way that it is intended as an offensive position. It's like, okay, you're going to take me down, I go to guard. I feel that I could expend effort fighting this takedown, wrestling with you, grappling, bringing you back up, pushing your head down, whatever approach I could. But instead, let's pull you into my guard and fight. And Jorge did that a little too in round one. I think that was always a workable thing, but because it was common, people got very good at, it's called inside control, where you get either into my biceps or into my armpits and you control me, you open me up and fucking start pounding on me. People got really good at that because they had to. People aren't as good at that anymore because they don't have to do it as much because people don't guard, people don't fight from guard, people are always trying to get up. For the last 10 years, people believed the guard is dead. When you are on the ground, get back to your feet. Because everyone's training that, if all your training partners are constantly getting back to the feet, what you get good at is keeping them down or getting to their back. What you don't get good at is defending submissions or defending elbows to the head, because it's never happening. Your training partners aren't doing it. So that skill can atrophy or just not be as sharp. That's when you do that, is when the world isn't doing that. If you are up to date doing what you hear, the world noticing, if you are now thinking, okay, it's all about calf kicks and feints and whatever, you're fucked. The game is, how do I beat people who are all about calf kicks and feints? How do I defeat people who are doing this? And you have to be, if you're a 17-year-old fighter right now, you're working to beat that thing that's now working to beat this thing. This is the game. This is also what you're doing with your fucking social media. If you're a business, this is what you're doing, you know, with your business strategy. It's what you're doing when you buy a house and flip a house. It's what you fucking do. This is the way you become successful. And one of the things I hate the most, where I know that I'll see somebody there like blah, 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 best practices. Best practices, if you're going to incorporate that in your business, is worst practices, because you're doing what's worked for everybody for the last 4 years. By the time you get it incorporated, it won't be best practice anymore. The best practice for your business is what your business should be doing in 2023, and then getting to that point. And it's the same with your fighting, and it's the same thing with your fucking Instagram. It's the same thing if you renovate homes. It's what you do. You have to think about the future, prepare for it.
And it's generic because every person is different. So what works for your best practices do not necessarily work for my best practice. You know, the best thing you can do is like, you know, I look to Joe Rogan as an interviewer, as a podcast host, and I take notes. I've studied him for my entire life. He's the best at it.
He's the best.
But I can't go out and pretend to be Joe Rogan. I'm not Joe Rogan. So there's a little bit of like, you know, you take a little bit from the best people. You know, you apply it to yourself, but you do have to, at the end of the day, be yourself. I can't go out, be Joe Rogan, because I'm not Joe Rogan. So
you're not Joe Rogan. There's certain things that he does that work for him, despite the fact they won't work for us because of who he is. You could train me for 15 years to fight like Michael Chandler, and I can never fight like Michael Chandler because I am not Michael Chandler. We can take every single 275, 85-pound man on planet Earth and try to teach them to fight like Francis Ngannou. They will not fight like Francis Ngannou. If we can take Stipe Miocic and teach him to fight like Francis Ngannou, he will not fight like Francis Ngannou. And that's also why the answer isn't the technique. The answer isn't the tactic. The answer isn't the tool, because the fucking tool didn't knock out Jorge or Weili. The artist using the tool did, because it wasn't what, it was when or why or how. You know, Prince, I can pick up Prince's guitar all I want. I can't fucking play guitar like Prince. You know,
no,
it's not about the tool.
Robin, you are incredible. I want to end on that note right there. Please, everyone, this Robin Black, the absolute GOAT of MMA social media. No, seriously, Robin, thank you so much for the time. I took you longer than I needed to, and I should have, but thank you so much, because this is the best part of my week. I love this. I enjoy this with like a deep, deep passion. Thank you so much for the time and enthusiasm.
My privilege, brother. Enjoy the hostilities, my friend.